So, what is RAAC, and how worried should we be worried about this sort of concrete? Well, Warren Thomas is a concrete investigation engineer for Henderson Thomas Associates. Warren, good morning.
Good morning.
So, concrete has it got a shelf life, all concrete?
It's a very good question. The problem is a lot of the structures that we've been constructing more recently, like back in the 50s and 60s, were designed with a 50 or 60 year lifespan. This includes major motorway structures. And the issue we have now is we've got to 50, 60 years and everyone's going, what's going to happen with them now? And with our highway structures, we have quite a robust inspection, testing and maintenance program. So the bridges are going to be standing up for a lot longer. And we're actually doing repairs and remedial measures to bridges to ensure they could hopefully stand up for another 50 years. When we move to, I would say, some of the most important structures that we look at as far as schools and hospitals, some of the most vulnerable people we're talking about, there is no regulator to ensure that these things are looked at on a regular basis. So RAAC concrete was really first discovered, the failures started in the 70s. It was banned in use in the mid-70s, and we had a massive glut of testing and investigations for HAC throughout the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and we even still regularly test it now as a pre-sale survey item when someone's buying a building. So it doesn't surprise me that this has happened. However, probably not we shouldn't be having such a knee-jerk reaction that we have with RAAC, because if it's kept dry and hasn't converted, which is the issue that happens with HAC, it can sit in schools. I mean, I've been testing a school for 30 years in London every 5 years to determine if there was any problems with the HAC, and there hasn't been.
I just want to stop you there, Warren, if I may, because you mentioned something also affects the other concrete that because obviously everyone's become aware of, the RAAC concrete, is moisture. Yeah. You mentioned moisture with RAAC, and RAAC also seems to be compromised if moisture gets into this thing. Now, this concrete could well be on external elevations of the M32. Now, we know, for example, the elevated section of the M32 around Eastville, that's going to probably cost 200 million. Well, when they say 200 million, they probably mean 300 million to sort out. You've got the Cumberland Basin, and you've got other forms of this concrete that's on the, it's to the weather, it's weather facing. How on earth do you keep this stuff dry?
Well, that's the problem. Where we've been investigating HAC more recently has been on rail bridges in Scotland, and you can't keep it dry. And the issue is the concrete beams were in such poor condition. We actually took cores, which is one of the things you do to determine if they have lost their strength. And we were finding very, very low strengths of concrete, which actually the structural engineers, because I'm not a structural engineer, I'm a materials engineer, but the structural engineers, they said, look, these things shouldn't be standing up. And we went, no, we can see completely. And that facilitated a program of removal and replacement of bridges in Scotland. And if the same issues happen elsewhere, the same thing's going to have to happen. Yes, definitely.
So briefly then, we are looking at obviously different types of construction concrete. RAAC, which is this high alumina cement concrete, and RAAC, which is basically, this aero crumbly concrete, if it's compromised by moisture. Should we be looking at all the concrete that we've got? I don't know, let's pick the BRI, for example, in Bristol, which was a lot of poor concrete, because I remember that, watching a programme on that, and actually checking all these things regularly, because I don't think that's happening, is it?
Well, I've been doing this for 30 years. And there's a number of companies out there that we're regularly testing. I mean, as I said, there's a robust program on highway structures, which keeps me very, very busy.
I bet.
The problem with buildings is that there isn't any regulator.
Does there need to be a regulator who is checking these things? Because I don't want to be sensationalist, but if this fails, it could fail catastrophically.
Well, the question that was put to me, and I said, isn't it amazing that when you drive to work, you ensure that the car you're driving in has an MOT, but the building that you live in and the building that you work in, I know it's not on our onus to check it, but who checks that the building you're working in and that you live in is safe? No one. And it's a case of we check all the highway structures and lots of marine structures, Bristol being near the sea. We've done loads of work on jetties and piers and dams and things like this. These are all done under a lot of this essentially through the Department of Transport. But when it comes to buildings, the only time we will test a building is when someone's selling it or they're changing usage. It's what's happened after COVID. A lot of the big office blocks are now being turned into flats and hotels, and we test them there. And this is when I will be asked, we better just check for HAC and check that there's no other issues. Chloride and salt are major issues. So when you're near the sea, as you are in Bristol, your structures and buildings that are prone to not de-icing salts, but windborne salts from the sea will affect it. So flats near the sea will be far more susceptible to breakdown of the concrete for a totally different reason of what we're talking about with HAC and RAAC concrete. But these are all things that we're testing on a regular basis, and people don't realise that. And there is no regulator. And I think you're saying, should there be? Yes, why not? Why do we not have a list of schools that have been checked that haven't got RAAC and haven't got HAC?
So you know that those two types of concrete aren't in them. Last question, if I may, Warren, as we hurtle towards the 11 o'clock news. Are we at the beginning of understanding that the stuff that was used post-war, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, is actually not as structurally sound as we thought it was? Are we at the beginning of something here?
I hope so, because it frustrates me that we were talking about this 6 months ago, and the government have only recently decided to close a few schools because of issues. And there's a lot more work to be done. And the problem is, because we're not getting paid for doing that, no one's doing research and development on the issues we've got with old concrete.
Warren Thomas, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Warren Thomas there, a concrete investigative engineer.